Welcome everyone to CCI Huronia's 7th webinar on COVID-19 and how to deal with this crisis in your condo. My name is Sonia Hodis and I am one of the many directors at CCI Huronia and a condo lawyer, as well as your moderator tonight. If you've missed any of our previous webinars, there are now 6 in total. You can find recordings of those webinars on our website, ccihuronia.com, under the Resource Content tab. Also, CCI National has our videos available on their Resource Center. Who is CCI? CCI is the Canadian Condominium Institute. We are an independent nonprofit organization that was formed in 1982. We have chapters from all across Canada, and in Ontario alone we have 8 chapters, and CCI Huronia is one of those chapters. I want to give a shout out to our friends in Red Deer, Alberta tonight. I know we have some people joining us from Red Deer. I know you're here to see Rafael, so welcome to our webinar tonight. CCI's main objective is education, and we also advocate for condos. The organization represents condo owners, condo directors, property managers, and all other professionals that work in the condominium industry, and we encourage all these stakeholders to work together. If you want to experience the benefits of membership and you're not a member of CCI, now's a great opportunity to check out one of your local CCI chapters and consider joining them. We're going to put a link, Debbie's going to put a link up in the chat box where you can go and find a chapter near you. And if you also go to the national website, you can click on the chapters tab and then on chapter locations to find a chapter near you. And that's the cci.ca website. As I indicated before, National has a resource center on the national website, cci.ca, and they've collected a bunch of resources from across the country on COVID-19. So that's another great resource to go and check out if you're looking for information on COVID-19 and how to deal with issues that your condo may be facing. Also, I just want to remind everyone that CCI National will be hosting a national webinar on May 7th, this Thursday, from 5 p.m. To 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will have representatives from each of our chapters across the country providing insights from the different provinces on issues that condos are dealing with during COVID-19. Registration is open. I know as of this morning we've had close to 900 people registered. So if you're still interested in registering for that webinar, please do so because registration is limited. And please don't forget to follow CCI Huronia on Facebook to find out about our upcoming events. One of the reasons that it's important to join us every week is to get the latest information on what's happening in Ontario in relation to COVID as it affects condos. And the Ontario government seems to be in the habit of releasing information late Friday afternoon. And once again this week, we got an announcement late Friday afternoon from the government with a revision to the essential services list, which took effect on Monday, May 4th. And I just want to draw people's attention to that because we're not going to get into a lot of detail about it tonight. But we have in our previous webinars had lots of discussions about lawn care and landscaping. And I just want everyone to know that the news this week is that lawn care services and landscaping services are now on the essential services list. There are some other updates to essential services such as garden centers. There's some updates on construction, car washes, auto dealerships, golf courses who are allowed to prepare for the upcoming season but cannot open. And then another thing that may be important to some of the condos in our area is marinas, who now may begin preparations, but they cannot be open to the public yet. So that's just some news in terms of what's happened in the last week. And one other important thing to remember is that the government also released on April 30th a guide called the Health and Safety Association Guidance Documents for Workplaces during the COVID-19 outbreak. And this is a guide that was released to help industry in terms of getting back to normal, whatever normal is going to be. So there's a lot of great resources. Debbie's going to put the link up in the chat box in terms of what different industries should be doing when they're getting back to work. So I just want to point that out to you as well because that's news in the last week. So although we haven't figured out how COVID works exactly, one thing that we know now for certain is that every week there is going to be some new news. So stay tuned and join us every Tuesday at 7 p.m. to find out the latest updates. We have another great agenda for you today with a great lineup of speakers and topics. The agenda's been sent out in advance, and I'm just wanting to give a shout out to our CCI Grand River chapter guests this week, Pam Smuts and Robert Mullen, who are joining us. Thank you guys for joining us this week. We're so happy to have you. In terms of speakers tonight from our CCI Huronia Board of Directors, we have Patricia Aaliyah, Ryan Griffiths, and Blair Spinney. As always, you can find the bios of our CCI Huronia directors on our website at ccihuronia.com under the About CCI tab. And then we have a couple more guests with us tonight. We have Rafael Drida from CCI North Alberta, Kirsten Dale, who's a member of CCI Huronia, and Allison Bradley, who is a registered nurse working in a psychiatric emergency unit. And she's going to be talking to us about mental health later today. So thank you to all the speakers. Also thank you to the Board of Directors for the time that they're taking to dedicate to planning these sessions every week. So thank you, everyone. And before we get started with our first speaker, I just want to remind everybody to please mute your phones. Don't unmute yourself, mute your cameras, mute your mics. And the recording of the webinar is going to be available within the next 24 to 48 hours on our website. If you're having any trouble connecting, end the meeting and log in again. And don't forget that we don't take questions live during the webinar, but we do have a chat box function that is very active. And as one of our participants had mentioned, that it's a great function that they love. If you want to ask a question, just click on the chat box icon, which looks like a little bubble, and type your question in. Our speakers, as well as our board members, will be monitoring that chat during the evening, and they'll try and get those questions answered. If we don't get them answered tonight, we will try and answer them in an upcoming webinar. Also, the usual disclaimer, please don't forget that the information provided today is general information and is not necessarily applicable to your specific fact situation. It is more important than ever that you contact your professionals and get professional advice about your specific fact situation. If you are a condo director and you want to use the protection of Section 37 of the Condominium Act, you need to know that this webinar does not provide you with the opinions that would provide you with that protection. So you do need to contact your professionals and get an opinion from them about your specific situation. In addition, there are people that will be reviewing this recording after today, so I just want to make sure that everybody knows that the information in today's recording is current as of May 5th, 2020. It is also, references are also made to the Condominium Act and other legislation. Those are references to Ontario legislation. So we're going to try something new today. We're going to launch a poll before we get into our first speaker. And the first poll that we have deals with AGMs and whether your condo is going to hold a virtual AGM while the emergency order is in place, whether you're going to use electronic voting while the emergency order is in place, or whether you're just going to postpone your AGM and hold it in person. So you can take time over the next 5 minutes or so to answer that poll question, and I'll share the results with you after our first speaker. And our first speaker tonight is Pam Smuts. She's a property manager from the Grand River chapter, and she's going to talk about virtual owners meetings and electronic voting from a manager's perspective. Pam?
Thank you, Sonia. Thanks, everybody. I took the opportunity to reach out to multiple management companies from large to small to be able to discuss this from many managers' views, not just my own. I do want to thank all of them who took the time to respond to my inquiries on this, as I know how we are all extremely busy at this time. It has certainly been interesting, to say the least, as we navigate through the ever-changing landscape, implementing new ways to try to keep business as normal as possible. We as managers, who have been referred to as gatekeepers many times, have certainly lived up to that title, as we ensure that our communities are protected and residents are staying safe during the pandemic. We were all told to stay home and stay safe, but we still need to stay in touch, which meant the incorporation of virtual board meetings for the board and property managers. Many managers agree that these meetings are more efficient than the in-person meeting. It may be virtual meetings going forward. It's a great way to allow the accounting department and an invited guest, like an engineer, contractor, or even a lawyer, to join the meeting remotely without having to worry about travel time to get there. This leads us into the newest change, which is the annual general meetings and owner meetings that are required for condo corporations. It was a relief to many when the Ontario government amended the current emergency order to permit condo corporations to hold meetings virtually and to extend the time period in which corporations must hold the annual meetings as per the Condo Act, as well as allow for electronic voting. This pandemic has certainly forced condo boards and managers to learn new ways of communicating, bringing to the community virtual meetings, webinars like this one, and electronic communication. The condo industry has had to advance technologically by decades in just a few short months. And with it, the opportunity of adapting to these changes and to continue with them moving forward. For most communities right now, it seems that they are putting off the AGMs as it's something that's a social event. So I'm interested to see how this poll turns out. But people will not easily forget social distancing. When this pandemic is over, and we should expect that meetings for the first 5 to 6 months after the pandemic could cause issues with the corporation getting quorum, as people will be scared to get close to each other. This could mean that there will be thousands of condominiums trying to find venues and book AGMs in the 90-day period. This will not be just for those who were delayed during the time for gathering restrictions, but also those who would normally be holding their meetings at this time. We will likely get most condos having to meet within 90 days of restrictions being lifted. So that would mean managers, auditors, minute takers, and lawyers will find themselves with multiple meetings needed to be booked on the same night. This will limit the possibility of having professionals to be able to attend certain meetings. The best way to avoid this is to hold the meetings virtually and not wait for the restrictions to be lifted. There are a couple of companies who have created hosted Zoom meetings, whereby they'll set up the meeting, work through the technical components, monitor the chat, arrange for secured sign-in, voting functions, coordinate the electronic ballots, electronic voting, and proxies, so that the meetings can run successfully. Mind you, there is a cost to have this done, but there's also many advantages. Notifications to owners can be done electronically. Managers, auditors, as well as any other professional can join from home and potentially be able to attend more than one meeting on that same day or night. There'll be no venue costs, and the allowance to not send a preliminary notice that was included in the emergency measures legislation will allow the meetings to be done within 20 days. Owners can sign in through the computer or call in to listen to the meeting. So that would allow all owners to be able to participate in this forum. While electronic meetings are a welcome solution, they may not be this suitable for all condos. It will take a while for corporations and owners to get used to holding these meetings, and many safeguards must be implemented in the process and formatted the meetings to allow for full owner participation, transparency, accountability, and proper record keeping. This order in council provides a great opportunity to adopt e-meetings and e-voting bylaws. It can be done now in the context of a virtual meeting, including with e-voting or by proxy. This could be a simple virtual meeting with a one-item agenda. Corporations will then have the tools in place to hold electronic meetings for the duration of the pandemic and continue with them after it ends. It really is a perfect opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. All right, so let's see. I'm going to end the poll. We've had 80 people respond, and let's see what the results are. So you'll see them on your screen. I'm just going to, for the recording, for the sake of the recording, let everybody know what they say. So in terms of the first question, whether people are going to hold a virtual AGM during the emergency order, 45% said no, 41% said they don't know, and 14% said yes. In terms of whether people are using electronic voting, we've got pretty well the same percentages. 45% 65% said they don't know, 43% said no, and 13% said yes. And then in terms of whether people are postponing their AGM and holding them in person, 44% said yes. So that seems to be the direction that most people are going. And I'll just post these results up there. All right, so let's move on to our next speaker, which is Patricia Alia, who is a condominium lawyer. And she's going to talk about virtual owner meetings and electronic voting from a lawyer's perspective, and some of the things that she thinks you should look at if you're going this route. Patricia?
Thanks, Sonia. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think Pam did a great job of summarizing the emergency order that was issued on April 24th at 5:45 p.m., just to build on what Sonia had spoken about. And I do think it creates a great opportunity for boards to get this work done so that the business and the operations of the corporation can be normalized. If you look at the order, and I've sent out a link, I'm going to send out a link that takes you right to the order as well as a summary that you can consider. You'll see that what CCI Legislative Committee had suggested was definitely reflected in this order. And that's something that you want to know a little bit more about, is that CCI, Ontario's Legislative Committee, has been actively trying to get these legislative changes made. And the government did respond by amending the sections temporarily to allow for these electronic communications. And, you know, in the interim, while these emergency orders are in place, these electronic ways of communicating will be available. And so I think that's important to understand, that it's just for the purposes of the pandemic. Bylaws will still later on have to be amended accordingly, and the act still will remain the same. So these are just temporary measures. So to me, electronic meetings are a go. Electronic meetings don't have to be a go and can be delayed until the emergency is over. A ballot cast prior to the meeting still does not replace the requirement to attend the meeting in person by proxy or by electronic means. So you still have to make sure that that is taken care of, and how that proxy is going to be exercised in order for the ballot or however the vote is going to be taken is done. The emergency orders are temporary in and of themselves, and they need to be renewed every 90 days. So what we also have to do is track whether or not the government is renewing these emergency orders, to know when we will have that 90-day window to start those AGMs starting to be called that have been postponed. Electronic means any electronic or technological means used to transmit information or data, including computers, fax, and email, which means that what we're going to call on condominiums to do, and their managers, is really educate both unit owners and board members, so that when they're exercising their voting rights, they understand the limitations of how they're exercising those votes, depending on what is being used. If it's a Zoom platform and then software over and above that platform, which is what some service providers are doing. As well, telephonic participation will be available for most of these service providers, but they have limited participation rights. And I think that's also what unit owners and boards need to consider. You know, we have a list of questions that we think boards should be looking at when they're looking at service providers. Proxy holders need to have the right number of ballots. How is this assured before and after and during the meeting? Who controls the meeting? Can participants corrupt or disrupt the meeting? You will care about security. How is electronic voting closed before the meeting? How far in advance of the meeting is this done? How are proxies retracted before the meeting? What I like about some of the service providers that are out there is that they're really actually asking boards to do a dress rehearsal. So what's good about this is, even though this is new technology, there are ways to work through some of the gaps, collect the data in advance, and, as I said, educate people on what the challenges may be in holding the AGM, but at least you can get it done. As well, you want to know how director disclosure forms are undertaken and updated. How are candidates from the floor nominated? Are recordings optional or mandatory? You know, you also want to think about that from the perspective of, if you just choose to record the meeting, that's going to be a verbatim transcript, and that is over and above what minutes really are all about. And so it'll be a matter of also determining what the value of the recording is in relation to creating the minutes. As well, you know, having your minute takers there to participate, to take the recording and make the minutes, will be things that you can think about in advance. As well, organizing, as Pam had mentioned, host, speakers, and attendees, but having their content available in advance will be helpful. And then you want to know how owners participate. When you have a question from the floor, one of the concerns, you know, my team has raised is, how do we get unit owners to participate, and how do we know who is eligible to participate? Can the chair ignore a question, for example? And that might be something that you want to think through in terms of transparency, making sure that people have the right and the ability to answer questions in a timely way, but also not hijacking the meeting. So these are just some of the considerations you want to think about when you're structuring it. Why? Because you also want to make sure that the meeting is not challenged. You want to make sure that you set out these parameters, let people know how participation is going to go, so that people don't say afterwards that the results were somehow not valid. So that's all of the things that we're thinking about from a legal perspective. Thanks very much, Sonia. Back to you.
Thanks, Patricia. And you know, your comment about the recording reminds me of a case that you and I did together, where there was a transcript, a verbatim transcript of a meeting, and that actually kicked us in the butt at that time. And we wish there was just like a small set of minutes that didn't have every single word recorded. So that's a good point to think about in terms of whether you want to record that meeting and if there is value to it, because there's a double-edged sword to that one.
Yep.
All right, so let's try our second poll, which I'm going to launch right now. And there's 3 questions, and this is about whether you're going to pass bylaws, or if you have bylaws with respect to electronic voting and electronic meetings. So the first question is, do you have a bylaw that allows for electronic voting? The second one says, do you have a bylaw that allows for virtual owner meetings? And the third question is your condo planning on passing a bylaw to permit electronic voting or virtual meetings? So I'll leave that poll up there for the next 5 minutes. And we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Rafael Drida. And I call him our techie, our CCI techie, because he's the guy we always go to when there's technological issues. And he uses his information to help boards and managers increase accountability and transparency and make great communities. He's going to talk to us today about virtual board meetings and some things that you need to think about if you're going to hold your board meetings virtually. So, Rafael?
Thank you, Sonia. Nice seeing everybody on here, virtually at least. I'll give you a little bit of a background information of what I'm doing, telling you about virtual meetings. My entire company, my entire team is virtual. We have staff across Canada, across the States, and Europe. So not only do we deal with the social distancing issue, but we're also dealing with time zones and things like that. And we have been running meetings virtually for the past 4 years about now. So today I'm going to show you or give you 9 tips for successful meetings. As it was just said, you know, you have to be careful how you use meetings for board meetings and for AGMs when you have a lot of owners involved. And there are some issues that you have to look at, muting people, things like that. But I'll get that into in a sec. But the first tip, and the most important tip, you're going to laugh at this, is wear pants, okay? The reason for that is there have been instances where people don't wear pants at their meetings. So what happens? There's a meeting. I don't know if you've seen the video. Somebody was doing actually an interview on a news station, and the lady's husband or partner walked behind her in underwear, white briefs. So make sure you wear pants. You never know who's going to come into your room. If you have any children running around, you might have to get up once in a while. So wear pants. Make sure you wear something underneath the screen. So that's just a little tip to get you laughing. But the second tip that I have for you is Right now, everybody, well, most of us are still at home, working from our offices, our bedrooms, kitchens, whatever the case is. When you have a board meeting or if you have an AGM, ensure that you still act professionally. So find a space where you don't get disturbed, inform your family, inform your colleagues, whoever is with you at your condominium or your office, that, you know what, for the next hour, 2 hours, I'm gonna have a meeting. Please don't disturb me. You want to act professionally, even though it's kind of online and you're not there in person, okay? The third tip that I have is make sure your space is clean, okay? Make sure your office, your cave, wherever you have your meeting, you're having your virtual meeting, ensure it's clear, it's clean. Think of it as if you're at a board meeting physically, right? You don't have a lot of distractions. What will happen is people online, they get distracted very easily, right? There's a squirrel and people are going to go a different way. If you have a lot of items, if you have a desk that's messy, people will start looking at your screen, be like, oh, there's a book. Well, you guys can see some books here. You know, there's a folder, and they're going to just kind of doze off and start thinking of your surroundings. What do you have in your area, instead of focusing on the actual content and the information that you're trying to discuss and the decisions that you're trying to make. Now, the fourth tip that I have for you is use a microphone and headphones, okay? Right now I have a lapel mic, I have an earpiece here, and there's several reasons you want to use a microphone. For one, different devices have different types of microphones. If you don't use headphones when you're using a microphone, sometimes what will happen is you're going to get feedback, because certain microphones, especially the lower end ones, what will happen is if you're having sound coming from your computer, from your laptop, from your phone, I guess phones are pretty good, so disregard phones, but computers, your microphone will pick up that audio and it's going to create a feedback loop, right? So you might have come across this issue where you're going to have a meeting and then there's an echo or whatnot. So ensure that you have a microphone, headphones. You know, you can get regular headphones from your phone, plug them into your computer, but make sure that you have a microphone and you have headphones. Now, people think that in virtual meetings, video is the most important, but it's actually the audio. Because if people can't make out what you're saying, you know, if you sound like you're in an amphitheater or in a washroom, there's echo, they're going to get distracted. They're not going to focus on what you're saying. They're going to focus on how your audio is coming out, right? So I'll give you an example, right? Right now I have a lapel mic. Now I'm going to have a different microphone. And I'm probably sounding a little bit different, right? There's a different audio coming out. So if you're doing virtual meetings, ensure that you have at least a good microphone, or at least you're plugged into your phone, okay? If you're using your phone and you don't have any headphones, when you're talking, make sure you're talking into your phone, okay? So the audio comes out clear. What people tend to do is they'll take their phone and they'll leave it on their table, right? And then they're going to be working their table, shuffling paper, whatever the case is, and the phone will pick everything up. So you're not going to have a nice, clear audio. Today, from the looks of it, all of the speakers are using headphones with a microphone, so that's fantastic, okay? So the next tip that I have for you is ensure you have a good camera angle. Now, I've been to virtual meetings, and this is something that I trained my team as well, to ensure that your camera's on eye level, right? Think of everything as, if I was doing this in person, how would I act? What would I do? Like when you're at a meeting, everybody's pretty much at eye level, right? You're not looking down at somebody, people not looking up your nostrils, right? So make sure you have your camera where it needs to be. If you have a laptop, put a few books underneath the laptop to raise the camera so you're looking straight up into people's eyes, right? It's a little bit more respectful. I've been at meetings where somebody's looking that way, they have the camera pointed here, and that's where their monitor is or their screen is, but their camera is here. So like when you're having a meeting like that, people are starting to wondering, are you actually looking at the meeting or you're doing something different, right? So camera angle matters quite a bit as well. Tip number 6 is lighting. Again, lighting and audio. As I said, you can have a camera, you can even use your phone as a camera, right? Because you can take it, you can plug it in, you can install any software, Zoom, GoToWebinar, GoToMeeting, whatever the case is. And you can just pop it on a tripod and look at it straight at the camera, and you're going to have good quality video. However, if you have bad lighting, you're going to look dark, right? So if you're in a room and if you have a window, ensure that your back is not pointed towards the window, because you're going to have a lot of light coming from the window. And what it'll do is it'll make you look dark and unrecognizable. So ensure if you have good lighting coming, it's actually from the front. You can even use like a little nightstand and shine out your face from one angle, just to give you good illumination so it's nice and clear.
Raphael, I'm going to stop you right there because we're running out of time, but Raphael has made available his video to talk about the rest of these tips, 7, 8, and 9. And you're not going to want to miss those tips. So check those out. The link is in the chat box. Debbie's put it up there. Raphael's got it on his screen. And you can find out what 7, 8, and 9 is in terms of his tips for holding a virtual board meeting. Raphael, thank you. We're going to have you come back. Sorry, we're just running out of time.
That's okay. Yes, go ahead. Go watch the video. It's about an hour. Tells you everything that that you need to know. Thanks
a lot. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so back to our poll. Let's see what the results of the poll are. So again, for the benefit of the recording, in answer to the question of whether you currently have a bylaw that allows voting, electronic voting, 75% of people said no, 9% of people said yes, and 15% said they didn't know. Whether they had a virtual meeting bylaw, 79% said no, 4% said yes. And in terms of whether people are planning on passing a bylaw to permit electronic voting or virtual meetings, 28% said yes, 18% said no, and 54% said they don't know. So I guess after tonight's presentations on electronic meetings, people may have some more things to think about, and maybe these numbers will change. So thank you for everyone for participating in the poll. It was great to have some participation from the audience tonight. Okay, so moving away from the issue of electronic voting and electronic meetings, let's move into another hot topic that's come up from time to time, and that's finances. And Ryan Griffiths, who's with CW Maxim, is going to join us tonight to talk about lines of credit and how this is now a new option for condos. Ryan?
Thanks very much, Sonia. Did I really have to follow RAF though? I mean, now I got to put this up somewhere, and you guys can see me better. I don't know.
And you've got to have some
anyway.
Cool pictures.
Oh, geez. How's my lighting? Is it okay? Or,
you're good.
Anyway, I'll get right to it. So, look, in the current environment, some condo corporations are considering borrowing by using a line of credit or an operating facility to help pay operating costs. So there's kind of two reasons there. A, because they're concerned about unit owners going into arrears. B, because they're concerned about additional operating costs, things like utilities, people are home all the time, unforeseen costs, extra cleaning or security. So there's multiple reasons. Largely the feedback so far has been that arrears has not been a huge problem. That's predominantly based on April 1 paid or unpaid fees. It remains to be seen whether May 1 is more or less problematic. It's still a little early. So I would say the next week that data becomes available, we should have a better sense of what the problem may or may not look like. Each condominium, each corporation is going to be different. They're going to have a different set of circumstances. I think some are going to be impacted potentially severely. Others might not be impacted at all, but I think each one's going to be different. So before your corporation considers borrowing, I think you need to do an assessment as to whether a spike in arrears or additional costs are going to be problematic. You want to take a look at how much operating cash does your corporation have and how much do they have relative to their monthly expenses. So some condominium corporations have plenty of cash and that allow them to continue to pay bills despite any arrears or despite additional costs. Others operate fairly lean. And they would run out of cash quickly if a substantial number of owners don't pay their bills. So there's no magic formula to that, but I would take a look at how much cash your corporation has, less their payables. And, that's probably a good measure of how much your corporation can sustain in terms of arrears or in terms of overages before they would encounter cash flow problems. So I think you want to do an assessment of that. an operating line of credit is a tool they might decide to use. This would be something that's short-term in nature, something the corporation could draw down to help provide operating cash and repay once they've collected the arrears, or repay over a short period of time by additional collections into the future. It's not meant to be a long-term solution, but rather a short-term solution to their problem today. I would suggest a corporation check with their primary bank. Most banks offer lines of credit as a product. If they have a program for condominium corporations, they might have a line of credit product that's a good fit. If they don't have a program to lend to condominium corporations, it might not be a good fit. The way that they calculate borrowing may not make sense for a condominium corporation. Some of the covenants they might have in place may not make sense, but it's certainly a good place to start. If that's not available through your primary bank, there are specialized lenders like CWB Maxium that have a product specifically for condominium corporations. The interest rates today are going to be pretty good. Short-term lending in today's market is pretty attractive in terms of the rate. So we're still in the early days. I think it's going to be a trailing indicator in terms of arrears as to whether that's a problem or not for condominium corporations. Some of the ones that I've seen today looking for a line of credit as a solution, ones that had arrears issues prior to the COVID-19 crisis. Commercial condominium corporations, where businesses have been impacted fairly immediately. Corporations that were doing a special assessment, and now maybe they're reassessing that choice, or they're expecting more difficulty collecting. And condos that were operating lean and can't really sustain much arrears or overages. Right, year to year, some condominium corporations take their surplus and they take it out of next year's budget. Well, they're probably operating leaner than those that have always left that in operating and built up a bit of a war chest. I also think condos where a single owner owns multiple units, or an individual makes up a large portion of collections. If one individual unit is a large percentage, I think they're more vulnerable because of that concentration. So if a corporation is going to borrow, if that's the choice you've made, you're going to need to consider how that borrowing is authorized. So a condo may have an existing bylaw they can rely on. They may need to obtain authorization by a new borrowing bylaw, or in some cases, they may be able to issue a new budget. In any case, the board needs to speak to their legal counsel and the lender they're working with to understand what those requirements are going to be and what that timing looks like. So although I suggest boards do an assessment, they have to do that on a proactive basis rather than a reactive basis. You have to understand if your corporation is at risk of not having enough cash, you want to get something put in place beforehand, not necessarily on a reactive basis. So, that plan could be an operating line of credit. It could be to defer contributions to your reserve fund. It could be to change those contributions to your reserve fund. But in either case, I think you need to do an assessment up front of the potential or the likelihood of a problem and what your particular plan is going to be in terms of how to address that. So often, as is the case with borrowing, it's best not to wait until you are in dire straits, right? There's time required to pass a new borrowing bylaw. If that's the route you go, that's 35 days. Lenders need some time to issue approvals and documents. So I'd recommend that you get something set up, regardless of what your plan is, have a plan and have it in place in advance. So a line of credit is one of a few options that are available. But my suggestion would be, if you think that that's the route you want to go, I'd work to get something set up on a proactive basis.
Thanks, Ryan. And like everything else in condo, it's always great to work with people who understand how condominiums work. So Ryan's links and his contact information is in the chat box. And if you have any question, Ryan is very knowledgeable when it comes to finances and condos. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Sonia.
All right, so now we're moving on to another financial issue, which is liens. And tonight we have Rob Mullen, who is a condominium lawyer from the Grand River chapter, who is going to talk to us about why we need a policy regarding liens. And Rob, I hear you've had some interesting experiences in the last couple of weeks with respect to liens that prompts this suggestion. Rob, do we still have you? Oh, you're, there you go.
Great.
You can now talk.
Fantastic. I think I've broken every one of Rafa's rules tonight with the exception of wearing pants. I
Well,
just had,
we're grateful for that, Rob. Thanks.
yes, yes, yes. What a great way to start. I just had to ask the cleaning staff not to interrupt. I don't know if my lighting's very good, and I have a bookcase in the background, so hopefully it doesn't distract anyone. I think it's far enough you can't read it, but if you do, I can certainly give you a list. Yes, it's been a very interesting April. Needless to state, 25% of Canadians are either unemployed or underemployed. And whether or not that comes to affect liens and arrears, I think is an eventual given if that continues. In April, I'm very busy as Sonia is and Patricia with the lien work. And we saw a dramatic increase, and we're still trying to unpack what that was from, because a lot of it probably was pre-COVID, but a lot of it, the increases were phased special assessments that were then due in March, and then people completely defaulted and stopped paying, then gave rise to the arrears. So COVID seems to have really hit in mid-March in terms of the economic impact, resulting in layoffs. And if you look at the calendar, you include April as perhaps the first complete month of arrears, then May, it looks like probably this is going to come home to be an issue for condos in June onwards. Now, we're making a lot of assumptions. I'm making assumptions that the COVID issue economically will lift probably in June or July, and we just don't know that. This very well could be an economic impact that lasts much longer than that, perhaps even a year or longer. Hopefully not, but that might be the case. Traditionally, when a lawyer gets a phone call from a unit owner who says they are unable to pay, there's a bit of a process where the lawyer listens to the issues, deals with the manager. The manager then perhaps takes it up with the board and sees if there's merit to the request, and then deals with it ad hocly. If we are going to see the volume of these arrears grow like our firm just saw in April, there's not going to be the amount of time to go through that ad hoc process and do it inconsistently. I think it behooves boards to spend the month of May, and even if you don't need the policy, that's great, but if you do, it'll pay dividends, to literally walk through as a board and say, when someone does indicate to the lawyer or the manager they're unable to pay because of COVID and underemployment or unemployment outrightly, what is the board's response going to be? I don't think it's fair to leave that discussion or that decision with either the lawyer or the manager, given the potential volume that could come. As we know, as Ryan said, condos, you don't need me to tell you, run zero-based balance budgets almost universally, and regrettably, many of them run in deficit. They are very vulnerable to any changes in economic impact. And if condos are not getting these fees, we all know what the results could be, and you don't need me to tell you that. So what could such policies include? Such policies could be perhaps a reduction of interest that's charged by the condo, a reduction perhaps of the fees charged by the manager and or the lawyer if they're willing. Disbursements can also really add up quite quickly on a notice of lien and lien process. Perhaps the condo willing to absorb those costs. That's a consideration for the condo. And also considering to keep the lien within the 90-day period. If someone is in 90 days arrears, perhaps the policy could be they pay that 1 month to keep it under 60, to keep it at 60 days and doesn't hit the 90, therefore avoiding the need for the lien in that instance in that month. What I think should be, and if a condo cannot have a policy to give people latitude and must collect, I think that should be communicated as well. So if the policy is going to have some permissiveness, some extensions, some reductions, some consideration if people are in a true need basis, that should be communicated. But if people are not going to be given extensions or reductions, I think that should be communicated as well. So people who are in circumstances that find themselves unable to pay, they can make arrangements or at least anticipate what the answer will be and look for alternative sources for funding before, as Ryan said, you're in that dire strait where you're at the 90th day, you're on the phone with the lawyer and there is no tolerance for the issue and you have to proceed with the lien. Letting that unit owner know beforehand what the results of that conversation would be, I think would be imperative. And those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
And as always, you know, policies are always about procedures like Rob mentioned, and there's no better time than now to start getting your procedures in order. So thanks for those tips. All right, so we're going to move on to our segment that we've been having for the last couple of weeks about mental health. And we're very lucky tonight that we have Allison Bradley with us. She is an emergency room registered nurse in the psychiatric unit. And she's going to talk tonight about dealing with acute stress in light of the fact that we've got all these lifestyle changes that are being forced upon us during the COVID crisis. So Allison, what kind of tips can you give us?
So let's first define what acute stress is. So acute stress is any sort of non-specific response the body makes on any demand that it might have on it. So it can occur in people that perceive that they can't adequately cope with the demands that are being made on them, or that their well-being is being threatened. So there are some common types of stressors. They include both physical and emotional ones. Here are just some quick examples. Physical stressors can be things like burns, infectious diseases such as COVID right now, pain, even running a marathon. So under the emotional category of stressors, there are things like divorce, there is financial difficulties and loss, there is grieving and the loss of a family member, and there's also a stressor known as a prolonged period of caretaking or caretaking burnout. So how do you know if you're under acute stress? Well, you feel a fight or a flight response. I think most of us are familiar more or less with what that feels like. So you feel essentially that, something's at risk. So your heart rate will go up, your breathing rate will likely go up, you'll feel tension in your muscles, your brain activity will increase, so you might start to worry or to ruminate, your skin temperature may go down, and you may even have a frequent need to urinate or to defecate. Now, what can we do about all this? So I have a couple tips from, it's an old book. It's called How to Stop Worrying and How to Start Living. It's by Dale Carnegie. It's a well-known book. So one of the tips is to live life in day-tight compartments. So that means that the past is a dreamland and that the future is not for us to see. You can also think of it as if you have an hourglass, there's only so many grains of sand at the top of the hourglass. And no matter what you do without messing with the hourglass, the sand will drip through one grain at a time. So we can take life just one grain at a time. So the other, the other suggestion that this man makes is that you can prepare for the worst if you're under stress. So therefore, you think about if you're really stressed out about something, you think about what would the worst case scenario be in this situation, and then you make a plan for what could possibly happen. Oftentimes that brings people great relief, just knowing that they have a backup plan in that situation. So another thing to do with general stress is that our thoughts are directly related to our emotions, and that can lead to actions. So I like to give the example of try to sit and think about getting upset about something without thinking any negative sort of thoughts. You can't really do that, right? So my advice is to try to get the thoughts under control before they lead to emotions, if possible. And I think about a week ago, there was a really great speaker on talking about resilience that gave some very practical tips on that. I can too at the end if I still have some time. So there's also a list when we're feeling stressed out. Most people are guilty of what is known as cognitive distortions. So an example of one would be catastrophizing. So that's essentially where you're looking at your problems through a big magnifying glass or binoculars. If something doesn't go as planned, you might feel like the situation is just enlarged and just completely out of control. So for example, you have a stressful day. You may be feeling a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, or emotional pain. You might consider to be the new norm rather than to just sleep on it and to think about it again in the morning. So there was a lady who was once learning to knit, and she made one mistake in her line of knitting, and she thought to herself, oh my gosh, I'm never going to learn to knit. And then she reminded herself, well, how silly is this, right? Just take it apart, try it again. And she went on to become a very successful knitter after that point. So another cognitive distortion is relying on emotional reasoning. So this distortion consists of believing that what you feel is what you are. You take on the identity of your feelings. So you can say to yourself, I feel like a failure at managing working from home with my partner laid off. I'm working, we have little money, I have to homeschool the kids and also clean the house. And so you might say to yourself, what sort of person does this make me? This makes me a failure. So a way to counter this would be to remember that one oughtn't to jump to conclusions based on knee-jerk emotional reactions of the moment. So refuse to let any feelings essentially get into the realm of proving who you are as a person. The next one I want to go over is personalization. So this involves a major trigger that can also lead to a lot of self-blame and emotional upset. This happens when you erroneously see yourself as the cause of external events, even though you weren't responsible for it at all. So example, when you feel responsible for how other people are feeling when you're around them, you're feeling responsible for other people having a good time or not. So we can't expect ourselves to be able to control the thoughts or the feelings of other people. Is an important thing to remember.
Allison, I'm going to step in here right now because I'm just looking at the time and we're running out of time. Maybe what we can get you to do is put some of your tips in the chat box,
Sure.
and people can see some of those tips while we finish up with the last two speakers.
Sure.
Thanks for joining us tonight. I know that you're working a lot of night shifts, and so we really appreciate you taking the time out tonight to join us. And just a reminder to everybody, this is Mental Health Week, and there's a lot of great information online from CAMH about making sure that you get real and what does it really mean when you answer I'm fine. So thanks again, Allison, for joining us. We're going to move on to Blair, who is just going to give us a quick update on funding for small businesses during the pandemic. We have condo directors on the line, but we also have members who own businesses. So Blair's going to give us an update for those people. And if you're a condo owner and you own a business, this is information that might be helpful to you. Blair?
Thank you very much, Sonia. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put into the chat box a link for the the Canadian website, the Canadian federal government website for the COVID-19 benefits. This website's actually pretty comprehensive. It actually gives benefits that are available for not only small business, but not-for-profits, charities, individuals, seniors and students. So it's a very valuable and informative website. And some of the things in there you can actually, there are actually drilled down to links to actually do the application. So it's very good. So what I'm going to talk about this evening are primarily for small business, but some of these things will actually also apply to not-for-profits and including condominiums. So everyone should pay attention, even if you don't know anyone with a small business. There might be something in here for you. So first of all, a lot of these benefits that may involve condominiums are wage related. So this won't apply to corporations that don't have wages, so that will probably eliminate most corporations, unfortunately. But keep in mind, though, that some of your suppliers may also be eligible for these benefits as well. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a wage subsidy. So this is the first one that came out. It's a temporary wage subsidy at 10%. It applies to small business corporations, small business corporations, self-employed individuals, and not-for-profits and charities. So this would also apply to any condominiums with payroll. So basically here you take 10% of the gross wages, and that amount reduces the remittances of taxes withheld. So that's not CPP or EI. So the maximum here is $1,375 per employee over the 3-month period, and $25,000 for each employer. The next one actually came out a little bit later, and it's only available if there's a loss of gross revenue. And those amounts are, you'd have to have a loss of 15% in March and 30% in April and May. So these can be actually compared to the same month in 2019 or the average of January and February 2020. So you can take your pick either way, you could calculate that for you. So this is, you have to apply for this monthly and get a direct deposit. And if employees are on leave with pay and eligible for this, you can also get a refund of CPP and EI. There are special rules for non-arm's length employees, which generally means your owners and family. So you want to take a look at that if you're interested. So if you're getting both these two benefits, you'll have to reduce this benefit by the amount of the temporary 10% one as well. I'm also, after I'm done speaking, I'm actually going to put in, I'll put in the chat box a link for a template you can use to help calculate these amounts. Another one I wanted to talk about is the Canada Emergency Business Account. So this provides for an interest-free loan of up to $40,000. And if you pay that loan by December 31, 2022, 25% of that amount is forgiven. And to qualify this, all you have to have is payroll from between $20,000 and $1.5 million. So condominiums that have superintendents, cleaning staff, that type of person on staff, may qualify for this. The next one is the Canada Emergency Benefit, Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and this is for self-employed people and employees who run out of EI. And this amount is for $2,000 for 4 weeks up to 16 weeks. There are some more, I'm running out of time here, so there are some more requirements for that. The last thing I wanted to just quick cover, just to mention, there are also tax deferrals for small business. Corporate taxes are deferred to September 2020, and that's installments as well as balances due. And you can also defer your HST until June 30th. So that's both for individuals and corporate. So I recommend going to that federal website and just checking out what might be potentially in there that could apply to you.
Thanks, Blair. Thanks for those financial tips. All right. Well, certainly last but not least, we have Kirsten Dale, who is a condo owner and a property manager working in condos. And she's going to give us some new ideas on how communities she lives in and works with are trying to maintain community. Kirsten?
Thanks, Sonia. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kirsten Dale, as Sonia mentioned, and I am a registered condominium manager with MCRS Property Management. But tonight I speak to you not just wearing my property manager hat, but as a condominium dweller myself. I own a condo unit in a small waterfront community here in Muskoka, and I have been touched to see a number of very creative new ways that both the residents in the buildings I manage and my neighbors in the community I reside in have derived to help stimulate our community spirit amidst the craziness of this pandemic. I think generally, when we speak of initiatives to help strengthen community in condominiums, the primary focus is face-to-face interaction. So a wine and cheese party, barbecue after your annual general meeting, Friday morning coffee sessions, Thursday night euchre in the community room. These are all very typical community events in condominiums. Enter COVID. And suddenly meetings of more than 5 are prohibited and recreational facilities like community rooms are closed. So I can tell you it's pretty hard to have a decent euchre tournament without 5 people or more, and it's hard to share an enjoyable cup of coffee in the parking lot. Condominium dwellers are suddenly home more than ever before, and simultaneously they are feeling more disconnected from their neighbors than ever before. But as I said, there are some new initiatives popping up that perhaps could be worthwhile to try in other communities. One of the simplest ways, obviously, to connect right now is through the internet, just like we're doing right now. I'm sure by now, most of us have missed a loved one so much that we've downloaded something like Skype or Zoom to have a video call with them. And we have a building that we manage that has had a Facebook group since 2017 for its residents. And this is a really interesting platform because these residents are now using this instead of just a thing to check for notices about parking lot cleanings. They're checking in with each other, they're sharing recipes, they're helping to celebrate each other's birthdays. A few of them met up last week with masks and walked up the road and picked up garbage. There's a whole lot of really interesting ideas that are coming out of this, and it's really endearing to see how they're sharing with each other during this time. Another really creative idea is actually in the community that I reside in. This is a very tight-knit community in the best of circumstances, and it has a fabulous infrastructure for supporting its residents in place. The design of the property is more like townhomes, so there isn't a shared lobby, but we do have a shared rock. And I'm not actually talking about the professional wrestler, I'm talking about like the rock on our property. So this rock has become our central giving hub. We have a vulnerable community here. We have a lot of immunocompromised residents and a lot of seniors. And as part of our ongoing efforts to help keep them safe, we frequently check in with each other when we're going out to the stores. And if anyone needs something, we call them and then we bring it back and we say, hey, your items are on the rock. And it's this central spot that everyone can go and pick up their items that they need. And it's a great thing to see. I think it's probably something that will continue beyond the days of social distancing. And finally, last really great idea that I've seen come out of all this lately is a building that a friend of mine lives in near Toronto has put together a celebrations board in their lobby. So residents were invited to send in upcoming dates of importance that they would usually celebrate with their family and friends. And the community was then invited to help them to commemorate these occasions. There were little card boxes that were set up in the lobby for upcoming occasions. And the community was told, you know, send in a card or a note of congratulations, whatever you might want to share. I've heard some really cool stories from this. There was a mother that was able to help give her 7-year-old a wonderful birthday. He got something like 42 cards from his neighbors. And then I heard another story about a couple that was celebrating their 26th wedding anniversary. And one of their neighbors went outside with a cello on their balcony and played a little song for them. So just some really creative ways to help us us to connect to the outside world when it's very hard to do so right now with social distancing. So basically the moral of the story is to put those thinking caps on. How can you help to boost the sense of community in your condo? There are several methods we can explore that don't require us to be face-to-face, just like what we're doing right now. And now is really a great time to test them out. Community is not just the concept of people living in the same place, it's a feeling of fellowship. And now more than ever, I think that we could use a bit of that feeling. May 4th to 10th is the Mental Health Week as established by the Canadian Mental Health Association. So on a variety of levels, it's really a perfect time to connect. Good luck, everyone. Happy connecting.
Thanks, Kirsten. And you know, it's always great to end on such a positive note and with some great tips and ideas on what you can do in your community. I love the rock idea. We know that CCI rocks, and now we know why, because we've got communities, condos in our communities that are rocking as well. So thanks for sharing those tips, and thanks for joining us tonight. Well, unfortunately, we have come to the end of another great webinar, and I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Before we sign off, Michelle Farley, who has been on several of our webinars in the last couple of weeks talking about fire safety, asked me to pass on a message. She indicated that since January of this year, fire fatalities across Ontario have increased by 65%. From the same time frame last year, with 17 Ontarians dying in fires in March alone. So she just wants to remind everyone to be attentive when you're cooking, as this is the #1 cause of home fires, and managers, she's sending out a message to continue to coordinate monthly and annual life safety inspections and testing. And we want everybody to stay safe. We want everybody to be able to come back to our webinars from week to week. So thanks, Michelle, for those tips and passing on that information. As always, if you have any questions that you want answered that didn't get answered tonight, if you haven't put them in the chat box, you can send them to admin@ccihuronia.com. If you have any tips and tricks, just like Kirsten shared with us tonight, feel free to send them to admin@ccihuronia.com. We are still collecting them, and hopefully we'll be able to publish something in the near future. As indicated at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded. It will be available on our website within the next 48 hours. I just want to give a shout out to some of our chapters in Ontario. Golden Horseshoe is having a webinar tomorrow night on condominium contractors in COVID. So you can go to the cci-ghc.ca website to register. Don't forget the national webinar is on Thursday from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register at cci.ca. Our sister chapter in London is holding a webinar on May 26th called No Stupid Questions. You can register at cci-sw.on.ca. Eastern Ontario will be starting their 4-part director's course on June 4th via webinar. So you can register on their site, cci-easternontario.ca. CCI Toronto will be having some non-COVID related webinars coming up, one a month. So you can always go to their website, ccitoronto.org, for more information. And they've also just released their new season of Condo Convo videos, which are available on their website. And last but not least, our guest tonight, CCI Grand River, is having their Leaders Circle webinar on June 9th, and you can register at cci-grc.ca. So I would like to thank again our speakers tonight. Don't forget, our next webinar is next Tuesday, May 12th at 7 p.m. You will need to register again when the e-blast goes out. And until next time, I'm Sonia Hodis. I ask you to be safe. Please be patient, be kind, stay home, wash your hands. Let's all work together to crush COVID. And from the entire CCI family, from coast to coast to your family, wishing you a good week, and we'll see you again next week on May 12th. Good night, everyone.